Very happy to kind of be here for all of you. As Minnie said, I'm the business and career librarian here at the library. I help people in the areas of job seeking, small business, and obviously nonprofit grant seeking. We have some really useful tools here at the library, one of which we're going to be kind of highlighting today. And those tools that we have can really help you on your grant seeking journey. But I think even almost more importantly, there are staff here at the library, myself pretty much, that can help you not only use these resources, but make them compelling for you and kind of make them sing in terms of the goals that you have. So it's not just, if you take away nothing from this presentation, you have to take away that I am your business librarian and I'm here to help you succeed, right? And Minnie mentioned that we have a consultation service here at the Grand Rapids Public Library. And it's, we have online on the Small Business Resource Center page a form that you can fill out. That form just goes right to me. So you can email me, you can call me, and you can set up a consultation. And a consultation is basically an hour's worth of my time with whatever your needs are. So if you're looking to find grants, if you're looking to connect with other resources, if I can't help you with your particular issue, chances are I know someone who can, okay? And I think that's kind of how we punch above our weight as an institution. And like we offer classes like this, but one of the things that I think makes librarianship very compelling is when you can kind of sit down with someone one-on-one and really listen deeply to what they need. And when you're able to do that, you can make librarianship extremely compelling. It's harder to do that in a classroom situation, which is why we, make room and investment for consultations and things of that nature. So we also do remote reference work. So if you're looking, if you don't live in the Grand Rapids service area, some of y'all mentioned that you were living in the county. The way that we look at it, if West Michigan wins, we all win. So I've helped entrepreneurs coming in from Muskegon, from Chicago, wherever people are coming from, I'm going to help you where you're at, okay? So that's who I am. All right, so what we're going to cover today. So this presentation covers not only the research portion of grant writing, which is the portion of the grant seeking process in which I can be most helpful. But it also covers, in a general sense, what's going to be expected of you in terms of grant seeking. So now some of y'all might be pretty experienced grant seekers, and this stuff might be a little bit old hat for you. But I think it's very useful to couch research in the entire grant seeking process, right? And that process, like anything important, is really governed by the questions that you are asking, right? So the way that I look at this and the way that the Foundation Center best practices kind of come down, there are really 4 steps to seeking a grant. The first thing you have to do is start asking questions of yourself and your organization, right? That will really help you seek out a grant because it will help you match with a grant maker. Because when you actually know your needs, you know the people you're trying to help, that will help you make decisions down the road. So it's a great place to start. Once you've asked those questions of yourself and your organization, only then do you start asking questions of a grantor, right? And there are a wide variety of different ways that you can come into alignment with a grantor and things that you need to understand in terms of the best practices of seeking out a grant that we'll get to. Then we go into the basics of grant writing itself. So once you've identified your needs, you've identified the needs of a grant seeker, it's only then that you actually start writing this thing we call a grant, right? Then you go into the 4th step, which is your next steps, which is a simple part of the process, but a part of the process that I think is often overlooked in terms of grant seeking. Because in grant seeking, you're very focused on getting the grant, getting the resources, getting the help you need. It's very easy to neglect that next part, which is, oh God, I actually have to fulfill the grant, I have to follow up, I have to do the things I need to do to not only be successful with this grant, but be successful in the future. So that's what we're looking at today. The North Star of every grant-seeking opportunity, of everything that we're doing in terms of the nonprofit world, is this. What is the change we are trying to make in our community? And I've worked with a lot of social entrepreneurs, people that want to work in the nonprofit space, and the first thing they'll think is, okay, I need a grant. It's like, well, do you need a grant? What's the change that you want to make? Because there are a wide variety of different ways that you can seek out resources, where you can help people, etc. One of my favorite examples of this are what are called L3Cs, which is my favorite examples of kind of non-traditional ways to help people in your community. And it was an L3C, a low-profit, limited liability company called Wheels for Workers. And Wheels for Workers, what they did is they would find junk cars, they would get them donated, and they couldn't write their donations couldn't be written off on taxes because it was an L3C, so it was basically an LLC that was stated to have a social mission. But they would get these automobiles and they would train people for free to fix the cars, right? And then when those people were trained up enough, they would be able to get jobs as mechanics in different shops around the Detroit area. And not only were they able to make money off those cars that were fixed, but they were able to donate those cars to the workers that had the skill to be employed. So it was a really interesting way to help people that you might think, well, that's clearly a nonprofit. I was like, well, they chose, in terms of their path and the change that they wanted to make, they thought the L3C was a better way to go, right? So no matter what you're doing, no matter where you're at, the North Star of all of the stuff that we're talking about today is the change you want to make in your community, okay? All right, so questions to ask ourselves. The first question you want to ask is, who are we trying to help? And the most important sub-question of that is, have we actually spoken to these people? Because you cannot truly help someone if you don't respect them, right? And the way that you respect them is by actually sitting them down, talking to them, and listening to their problems day to day, right? So that needs to be the first question we ask. And identifying that kind of person that you want to help is a really useful business idea called a target market, right? And your target market consists really of 4 separate areas, right? So in terms of it consists of 2 areas. The demographics, which is who they are in terms of the age, nationality, geographic location, resources, etc. And then psychographics, which is what they value, how they think, etc. And once you have that idea in your head, a lot of the decisions that you need to make about seeking a grant become a lot easier. And it's really funny when I do, because I obviously I do small business stuff. And when you talk about the target market in the context of a business plan, it makes things so much easier to sell and to market if you have an actual person in mind that you're trying to help, right? So then, what are the resources we need to help these people? One of the things I think is very overlooked in terms of grant seeking and the grant seeking world is the first thing that we go to is cold hard cash, right? Well, we want to do program development. We want to develop this program. That's the most common way that funders seek out, their funders dole out funds, is that they dole those funds for program development. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But the point is that there are a lot of things that you need as a nonprofit and that people need as, people that are not just that. There are foundations and funders that provide digital resources. There are funders that provide land. There are funders that provide pro bono legal services. So there's a lot of things that you need to be helpful, and there are a lot of different organizations that provide those things. So you don't just need, it's not only cash that we're looking for, it could be a wide variety of different things depending, again, on the kind of change we want to make in our community. All right, so time frame. One of the things that I always harp on when someone comes to me with a nonprofit query or a grants query is, what are your timelines looking like? Because in terms of the best practices of the Foundation Center, when you identify, from the time you identify a need to there is money in an account or a resource that you can actually take up and use, it could be anywhere from 9 months to a year, right? With that in mind, and that doesn't mean, again, that you can't get help in a shorter time frame, in a different kind of situation, but it does mean that if you're seeking out a nonprofit grant, you need to allow for that. And you also need to be, and we'll get into that when we start talking about questions of the grantors, you always need to be aware of your timeframes, because you could have the best grant in the world. You could have the best statement of need. You could have everything lined up in a row. You've got a relationship with the grantor, all this stuff. If you don't get your timelines right, all of that is for naught. Okay? So pay attention to that. And so then, what are the current resources we actually have? And I know I'm switching around this a little bit, but human capital. So we think, it's easy to think, okay, well, I don't have anything. It's like, well, any funder is going to want to know that you are the community coming together to solve a problem, not just one person, right? Because it is wildly rare, nigh impossible, for one person to have all the skills you need to run a business, make substantial change, run a nonprofit. If anything, you need a board that's going to exercise oversight. You need legal help. You need tax help. You need help, right? So if you're going to be seeking out a grant, you have to have the human capital to make that grant successful. And that falls under your resources. Even if you don't have a building, even if you don't have a ton of money in the bank, even if you don't have a bank of computers or whatnot, there is resources that you're going to need and that you will have as a nonprofit that you need to take into account, right? So I know I'm bouncing around with a little bit. Do we have nonprofit status? Nonprofit status, what's called 501c3 status, is a specific tax status that's maintained by the IRS, right? And those organizations that can gain 501c3 status are organizations that provide a specific social function or an artistic function or an educational function, right? And there are specific definitions of that the IRS maintains. One of the things that you should know when you're doing research on this is that if you're just Googling, I'm not saying that Google is a bad resource or anything. You need to be careful about where you're getting your information from, because the vast majority of the time when you just search 501c3 nonprofit registration, what will pop up is not the IRS website that you need, right? That will actually go through. It has a bunch of guides, has a bunch of explainers, because it's not out of your ken to register as a 501c3, but it is in terms of comparing it to, okay, if I register for a limited liability company, that's just $50 and 2 pages. You send it into Lansing and you get it in 2 weeks. It's more complicated than that. But it's very easy for a company that's maybe a little more fly-by-night to take that publicly available information and then say, oh, for $50, I can give you all the forms. Like, well, all those forms are free, right? So just be cognizant of that and be careful of that. One thing that I always find useful, and it's really actually a good idea to understand when you're doing normal searching online, the functions of the search tools that you're using. So if you do a search of IRS, like I said, you'll get a bunch of garbage back oftentimes. But if you do IRS nonprofit site, SITE, :.gov, it will only bring back U.S. government and municipal sites. So that's actually a really useful way to narrow that down, because that's what a lot of research is narrowing down the amount of choices that you actually have to the choices that would actually be useful to you. So anyway, okay, The worst situation that you can be in as a nonprofit is if you get a grant and you do not have the capacity to carry out that grant, right? So there are a lot of things that you need to have in place in order to carry out a grant effectively. Do you have the fiscal oversight necessary to do that? Do you even have the ability to take on funds? Do you have, if you don't have that, do you have a fiduciary that can have that relationship with you, that can hold on to the funds and make sure they're spent correctly? You have to be able to have the capacity to carry out the grant before you have it, right? And so we talked about human capital. Oh, in the line of a funder really wants to see that you are the community coming together to solve a problem rather than just a single person, a grant can be made much, much stronger if you have other organizations with whom you can collaborate, right? And we'll talk about but the basic idea is that if there is a problem in society, chances are, especially in West Michigan, we have, I don't know if this is actually true, but it sure seems like we have a ton of nonprofits, right? Relative to the rest of the country. So if there's a problem, someone's probably trying to solve it. Are they solving it in the way that you would solve it? Are they solving it in the way that you think it should be solved? Are they successful? Those are other questions. But there's probably someone who is trying to solve the same problem that you've identified in the first part, right? And trying to help the same people that you've identified, again, in the first question. If that's the case, collaborate. Because, again, we're talking about, just like we were talking about resources and human capital, if you're bringing in another organization and you have a clear relationship with them, that just makes your grant stronger. And it just makes the change that you want to see in your community that much more likely, right? Now, you want to have a defined relationship with that collaborator. You probably will want to have what's called an MOU, or a Memorandum of Understanding, that is basically in writing, outlines what you want to do and what you expect of each other. But if you have that relationship and you make that clear, your grant is going to be way stronger. It's something that grantors are looking for. And then, are there other stakeholders in that same vein? Are you going to be working in schools? Are you going to be working with area government institutions like the Grand Rapids Public Library? Are you going to be doing work, are you going to be working with local businesses to do something? Understanding the other stakeholders that you have in your community is also super important, not just in the nonprofit world, because nonprofits exist within the fabric of society. The more threads you got, the stronger that fabric is going to be. And our last question, what does the market look like? And again, I'm a business librarian, and it always really kind of interests me how similar the nonprofit world and the for-profit world are. It's just use different language for it, right? It's like you don't say profitable, you say sustainable, right? You need to understand what your niche is as a nonprofit, right? What is the thing that you do better than anybody else? And how do you fit within the market, so to speak, of the nonprofit world? If people are looking to do a summer reading program, where do they go? If people are looking to do a program to end student hunger, where do they go? If people are looking to do work for local farms and community connections and local farming, where do they go? And you, as a nonprofit leader, as a social entrepreneur, all these different titles, you have to know all of that. And you have to understand the relationships between those organizations, right? Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to effectively understand the work that's being done already. And you won't be able to understand how your work is going to make more of an impact of the work that's already being done, right? So I know this is a lot, right? There's a lot of questions here. But The benefit of you asking these questions in the beginning is that it makes the other questions that you have to ask way, way easier. And if you have answers to these questions, not only will seeking a grantor be easier, but writing the grant will be way easier. That's why we ask them in the beginning. So, okay. So questions we want to ask our possible funders. Excuse me. Well, here's a question. Here's a question for y'all before I get into this. What is the main reason a grant gets rejected? Anybody? What do you think? That's a good guess. Incomplete application was the guess.
The mission is not clear.
The mission is not clear. Anybody else? There you go. Third time's the charm. So the main reason why a grant gets rejected is that the grant did not align with the funder's needs, right? And sorry, I keep wanting to skip around because I know what's coming, but anyway. But the point is that the better that you can understand a funder's needs and their stories and their wants and desires and their history, the better chance you're going to give yourself when you actually seek out a grant from them, right? Excuse me. Because, it's the alignment that's the big problem, Because most of the time when you seek out a grant, excuse me, most of the time when a nonprofit organization seeks out a grant, they know the problem, they know the issue, they're doing the work. It's just that it's that alignment question that trips people up, okay? So the first thing that you want to understand is not what the foundation says about itself, although you do want to understand that. The first thing you want to understand is where have they actually given in the past, right? So there's usually a difference between what a funder will say it funds and then where the funds are actually going. And we'll get to how we can find that information in just a bit. Another thing that funders do in order to be effective is that they will give in a particular geographic area. So they know, just like we were talking about earlier, they know all of the nonprofit world of West Michigan, for example, or they know the nonprofit world of Chicago or Detroit or LA or where have you. And that allows them to be effective because they know where they've worked in the past, they know the reputations of different organizations, and they're able to say more confidently, okay, this organization is the one that we should go with. So not only are they looking at where the funder is located, but the geographic focus of that funder. And we'll get to that when we get to research and stuff like that. But then in what amounts and what kinds of resources are they used to giving? So are they used, if you're looking for a grant that's 6 figures and the funder has never given more than $5,000 for any grant whatsoever, it's probably a bad choice, right? Doesn't say it's not going to happen, but again, we want to be as effective as possible. It'd probably be a bad choice. Conversely, if you're looking for a grant that's $5,000 and they've never given a grant below $100,000, that also is not a bad choice. Again, it's that alignment that we're looking for, right? And you also want to look for the kinds of ways a funder provides their support and for what they provide their support. So the majority of grants are given based on the Foundation Center's, well, now it's candid, but the Foundation Center's research is that the most grants are given for what's called program development. So the idea that you have a program that has a specific end date that you want to get to, and that they can actually go back to their board and say, look at this change we made, right? That doesn't mean there aren't grantors that will just give you general operating funds for whatever you want, but that's just rarer, right? So you have to understand if a funder doesn't have that kind of a history that you're saying, all right, well, I want general operating funds. I don't have a specific program that I want to fund. I just want to fund my organization. And they don't, and the past grants that they've given don't align with that, it's going to be a harder sell, right? There are also specific restrictions that a grantor will have for the grants that they give. It could be a geographic restriction. They only give in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Athens, Georgia. Or it might be that they don't give or do give only to faith-based organizations or things like that. And you want to make sure that you understand those restrictions so you're not wasting their time and they're not wasting your time. Are they actually soliciting for grant applications? So when you're looking through our the database in the Foundation Center database that we own, it's Foundation Database Professional, one of the quickest ways you can make a search more narrow is that you can actually search only for grantors that are accepting applications. Because there are a lot of grantors that want you to, or they want to give to the organizations that they want to give to. They know what they know whose relationships they have, and they don't really want unsolicited applications, right? That does not mean you should ignore those organizations, though, because all that really means is you need to build up a relationship with that organization before they would provide you with a grant, right? And that's something that, obviously, we're all go-getters here. We're all, very good-looking and very friendly, as we've seen through our introductions, right? And so we're able to build those relationships really well. And if we're able to build those relationships really well, that might be that we might be able to understand and again align with those grant makers that are not accepting applications. So don't ignore them, but keep that in mind. So understanding again where they've given in the past, and if those organizations align with what you're trying to do. One of the ways that I find it's really useful to search is not only through grantors, but also grantees. So if you have a grantee that is working in your same area and this organization has given to them, it might be a smaller step to give to an organization that you're involved in, if that makes sense. And to be really effective for any kind of grant seeking, it's really vital that you understand the values and needs of the grantor. What is it that what is the change they really want to make, right? And you understand that by understanding who's running the organization, understanding what they say about themselves, and understanding the relationships that drive these organizations. Because that's a really big part, especially here in West Michigan, of nonprofit grant seeking, is those relationships. And that's why it's useful to know, again, who's running these organizations. In a deep way, you kind of want to understand what their story is, right? So in the business world, like we were talking about target market, right? So we have a target market here of a grantor. You have their demographics, just who they are. Their psychographics is what they value. What is the story they're actually telling about themselves, right? Are they telling themselves that they are, working hard to solve a particular issue? Is it that they are really, are they committed to a region, not necessarily a particular issue itself? Are they committed to a particular kind of person that they want to help? All that stuff is really useful to us because that allows us to write a grant that's actually aligned with what a funder wants from us. Okay? And again, timelines. So you might come up with, and it's very likely you will, come up to and find a grantor that might have a part-time board, that volunteer board. They may meet once a year and they go over grants and that's what they get. And you miss that deadline, again, you could have the best grant in the world. You could have everything in line. You could have the statement of need that is it brings people to tears. Doesn't matter because you didn't make it in, right? You got to wait till next year or wait till next quarter. Okay? So understanding their timelines is going to be really useful to you because, again, if you don't get those timelines right, nothing else really matters. And then understanding what their expectations of their grantees are, right? So what is it they actually, when they're, doing grants and they're working through grants, what do they actually expect from the grantees that they're giving to, right? What are they actually going to expect from you as a result? So, and one thing that a funder will usually make clear, either in their own literature or through the database that we own, is what's called an initial approach. There are a lot of organizations that they don't want to talk to you, they don't want to know you, they just want that original grant, right? It's oftentimes, though, that there's another initial approach that they want that's not nearly as complicated as writing an entire grant. Not that writing a grant is super complicated in the first place, but it could be a letter, what's called a letter of intent, which is basically a memo that says, hey, we're an organization, we really want to write a grant with you, right? Or it could be as simple as a phone call or a meeting or something like that. And understanding that initial approach will get your grant seeking efforts off on the right foot. And that is really important. Okay, so Foundation Center. And we're going to be we have time today to actually what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going around after my presentation. I think we're going to have a little break, and then we're going to go into actually the database itself, and we'll kind of help you. I'll help you with the initial searching and stuff like that. And there's 15 of us, I think, so I'll be useful to be able to kind of sit down with each of you for a few minutes and kind of get you started in terms of searching. But the Foundation Center is a gold standard resource for grant seekers, right? It is a really excellent resource. It's been around for a long time. There are other competing resources. I think Grand Valley has, I think, what's called Grant. It's like Grant Star or something like that. They have a different product that they use, which actually is still accessible to you because, fun fact, they're a public research institution, and they have to make the resources that they have available to you as citizens, which is really sweet because we live in a country where our university system is specifically created to help not just the people that are there, but all of us as citizens. So don't forget that. I think it's very easy for us to forget that, even though we are the state with the first land-grant university in the United States, which is Michigan State University, which also has an excellent library. So shout out to MSU. Go green, go white. All right, so the Foundation Information Network, of which we are a part, they make the Foundation directory available to the public. The one thing to remember, or one thing to mention, is that the Foundation Center resources are only available here at the library. So you can be on our computers, you can be on our Wi-Fi, and you'll get access to it, but you unfortunately can't get access to grant seeking resources outside of the library walls. During the pandemic, they obviously kind of opened that up a little bit, and I was like, "Can we keep that going?" And they were like, "No." And it was, I don't blame them, but it was bad to have to go back to that. So I think the closest one to us is Kalamazoo. But we are the only one in West Michigan that carries these particular resources, and it's something that as a library staffer, I'm really proud of, and that I'm proud to kind of be among a rare number of these libraries. So there's also, again, going back to the public research universities, there are public universities that actually have this resource, including Michigan State, U of M, and Wayne State, and Kirtland Community College also in Roscommon, which is just a little bit, well, not a little bit, but a little north of us. So anyway. All right, so as a research professional, One of the things I always find useful is to engage with the classification system and the taxonomy involved in any given resource. So in our collection, we have the Library of Congress subject headings, and that kind of rules our print collection. In business, we talk about NAICS and SIC codes, so NAICS and SIC codes, which are government ways of classifying businesses and industries. For the Foundation Center, they have the philanthropy classification system. And I find it super useful to engage with that in the beginning for a couple of reasons. So first, the philanthropy classification system, and really any classification system, has different ways of describing things that you and I know about, right? My favorite example from this is when you think of the word literacy. I mean, I'm a librarian, right? So if you tell me the word literacy, the first thing I think of is, all right, a kid learning to read, right? So it's like you up to third grade, you learn to read, and then beyond third grade, you read to learn. That kind of a deal. Problem is that there's a bunch of different kinds of literacy. There's financial literacy, there's digital literacy, there's cultural literacy, emotional literacy, all sorts of different kinds of literacy. So when you're thinking of programs that promote literacy, in the Foundation Center, they classify it as reading promotion, right? And it's not to say that that's a kind of a completely left field way of describing that, but it is to say if I didn't engage with the classification system, that's not what I would be thinking of, right? So it's just useful to engage with it straight off. So there's a few things that are not super complicated, but bear some explanation. So first, subjects. Who is being supported, right? So that's the first question. Who are we actually trying to help? Wait, I'm sorry. I screwed that up. Subjects. What is being supported? So that speaks to the kind of program you want to run. Are you running a program to promote literacy? Are you running a program to help people register for government benefits? What have you. Second, populations. So the actual who is being supported. The organization type. That's the type of organization that is actually either providing support or receiving support. And then transaction type and support strategy. So transaction type is how the organization provides support. So that's the actual resource that they give. And the support strategy is how the goals of a program or grant are being implemented. So the idea that, well, once you have that resource, what is the grantor calling on you to do, right? So, for example, a transaction type might be a cash grant, right? Whereas a support strategy might be create a curriculum for reading that is wildly effective. So in each of these types of terms, exists in a hierarchy. So the deeper down the hierarchy you go, the more specific term you'll get, right? I find that when I'm initially searching, if you're searching for stuff that's a little bit wider, you can usually have a little more success, right? But fiddling with that is the kind of the way that searching works, if that makes sense. So, and these explanations can get super specific. So this is gardening. And I will not read this out to you because this is, I think, 500 words. But it is the definition that the Foundation Center uses for gardening as a subject line. So they can get very specific. And that's useful for us because, again, someone's actually gone through and said, well, if I want to describe gardening, what does that actually mean? And there are other terms that might be more useful to us or less useful to us, but I know specifically what that is. So, and obviously this is less complicated. This is just the definition for caregivers or people who look after a person who is ill, frail, disabled, and otherwise unable to look after themselves. So again, you've got the population type that you're working with. You've also got the definition here for public charity, which is different from like a private foundation or things like that. So there's lots of ways that this can help you navigate the information that you're going to find in this resource more effectively. And so, like I was saying, transaction type, when you're looking at that kind of stuff, you're looking at, say, a matching grant or a pledge or pro bono services, talking earlier about there's lots of different things that a grantor can provide you that's not just cash, right? And when you're looking at support strategy, so you're saying, continuing support, program support, which falls under the program development, re-granting, et cetera. So what they're actually asking you to do. Okay. So one of the things that the Foundation Center kind of presents you with is a simple search bar. And I don't like this, right? Because what this search bar will do is it will take the words that you put in there and it will try its best to guess what you're actually talking about. And you can even see it when you do a search here, and you'll see the advanced search, and it will try and usually fail to figure out what you actually mean. That's why I definitely recommend that you go to the advanced search filters, which are in the upper right-hand side of the search bar, and that will get you to all of the search functions of this tool, right? And so once you do that, you can go, and again, it's much simpler if you just parse it out this way. So you can go into subject area gardening, geographic focus of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and you come back with specific amount of grant makers, the grants that they've given, the 4 recipients, and 990 tax forms. So just a quick aside, a 990 tax form is a form that the nonprofit needs to provide to the federal government to maintain its nonprofit status. And that's where a lot of research and on grant seeking and grant making used to be done until Foundation Center parsed all that information and made it much more searchable and available to us. So you can still do grant seeking and searching that way, but if you use this database, it's a lot of the same information made much more searchable and much more user-friendly. So you can also search for specific organizations, either grant makers or grant seekers. And what that will do is it will get you, when you go to a grant seeker record, you're immediately going to see where they've given, what's being funded in a general way, and how big the grants are. But the thing that I recommend you go to first is what's called the applications and RFPs section. The applications and RFPs section gives you what are called the giving limitations, right? And it becomes much easier to say yay or nay on a possible prospect when you just know, oh, I am within the giving limitations. Great. Then you can go on and see if they're a better fit. But if you're not in the giving limitations, you don't need to keep relitigating that particular funder. You know, all right, well, they're not that they're dead to me, but you don't need to pay attention to it anymore. So in terms of the Steelcase Foundation, it's giving limited in areas of company operations with an emphasis on Athens, Alabama, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. No support for churches or religious organizations not of direct benefit to the entire community or discriminatory organizations, and no grants to individuals except for employee-related scholarships or for endowment or conferences or seminars. So if your grant follows under any of those, then probably not a good idea, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. And so you're also able to see where they've given grants in the past as well. And I know this is really small, but we're gonna actually be working with the database in a little bit. So I just wanted to get through this, just make sure everybody kind of knew what we were talking about. And the thing that you need to take away from this is that you can write any grant, but you cannot write every grant. What I mean by that is you could write a grant right now for the Ford Foundation for $500,000 and be wildly successful, right? But you can't write 100 grants and just blast them out into the night and hope you succeed, right? Because not only will you probably not succeed, but also you are going to be wasting a ton of effort sending and making these grants, right? So you want to give yourself and give the grants that you're writing the best shot possible. And how do you do that? Well, there's a few things that you can do that will be useful in terms of that reality. So then we're looking at how do we actually write this thing? So we're going into the actual writing part. We've asked the questions of ourselves. We've asked the questions of our funders. Now we've identified a good partner, a good, well-aligned grantor. What are we actually being asked to do? So, and again, I can't stress this enough, pay attention to deadlines and funding needs. In a general sense, it's very useful to have multiple people working on a grant, right? But to have one person edit the grant so it speaks kind of in one voice, if that makes sense. So no matter what you do, just make sure that your grant speaks in a consistent style, and that will be useful. Consistency beats effort. So one of the reasons why I put that in there is that the people that are seeking out grants that I often work with are often not professional grant writers, right? They do this either on a volunteer basis, or they're on a board of a grant seeking institution, and they really want to go for a grant, but they also have lives and children and other things going on, and it's very easy to get caught up in, well, I'll do this when I have when I have an entire day to do this, I can make it happen. That day will never come, right? We don't have free time. All of the time we use is already taken, right? Even if you're literally just staring at a wall when you get home, you probably need to stare at that wall for, I don't know, mental health reasons or something, right? So you're much better off working in smaller chunks and working consistently rather than waiting for a large chunk of time to make this happen, right? Also, reading grants is useful. So reading grants is a useful thing to do. So one of the things that I find useful whenever you're trying to write something is that you read the thing you are trying to write. We obviously have grant-seeking print materials here at the library, but there are a lot of ways that you can seek out grants that are already successful. That is a useful thing to be able to do, right? So, and I originally talked about this when I was just the business librarian, and I would work with people who were working on business plans. And what's the first thing you want to do? Well, it's probably good to read some of them to get an idea of what they're like. And then it'll be much easier to write them in the future. And to find that kind of stuff, obviously your local library, but also grantspace.org. Grantspace.org is a site that is maintained by the Foundation Center and has a lot of sample documents which could be useful to you, and things like MOUs, letters of intent, stuff like that. So there's a lot of sample stuff that you'd be able to draw on from the Foundation Center, which is obviously a good source. It's very important to understand that any grantor is going to usually want specific things from you. Like they want specific answers to questions that they're asking and specific kinds of grant applications that they put out. However, those grant applications generally want the same kinds of information, right? They're looking for who you're trying to help. They're looking for your financials. You're looking for all that kind of stuff. So with that in mind, if you're looking to kind of start out with the grants writing process, the Council of Michigan Foundations does put out a common grant application, which has, and again, it's not complicated. Most of life is hard, not complicated, right? I could talk your ear off about that all day. But the point is that if you're looking to seek out a boilerplate grant or a boilerplate kind of grant that you can then adapt to different organizations, or they might use that common grant application, the Council of Michigan Foundations does provide that. So, and then there's no real right or wrong way to do this. But if you're including an executive summary, which I definitely recommend, And it can vary, but if that is part of your grant writing process, write that last. It's way easier to summarize a grant once the grant is written. So just all right. So questions that you're going to want to answer. Why are you the best organization to execute this particular grant? And then you're also going to need to understand and make the grantor understand who is going to do what. So in terms of your collaborators and stuff like that, who will do what according to this? What is the need we'll be addressing? So usually a grantor is going to want what's called a statement of need. And a statement of need is exactly that. What is the actual need you are trying to address? And a common pitfall that you need to be aware of is making your statement of need match the resources you are trying to procure. So what I mean by that is don't make your statement of need so dire that you have no hope at all of putting a dent in the problem. But it's also a balancing act because you don't want to make it not so like, well, everything's great and happy and we don't even have anything to do here for obvious reasons, right? So there's a balancing act of that. So you just need to understand that the scope of your problem is commensurate with the funds and resources that you're asking for. Does that make sense? All right. So then what are your actual goals and objectives? So thinking about, all right, well, what are the actual kinds of things that we want that the grant is going to do, as well as the measurable objectives that we will know whether we will have succeeded or failed. And there's two kinds of evaluation that you want to have in a grant, both, if at all possible, summative and formative. That means you want to be able, if at all possible, to test while the grant is going on whether you are succeeding or failing, and then at the end be able to tell the grantor, yes, we succeeded or we failed. Hopefully not failed, but you want to be able to make that distinction. And the reason why you also want to have formative evaluation is that it really helps you if you need to pivot halfway, right? So if you're in your grant, you're trying to make a change, that change is not happening in the pace and the scope that you want, well, maybe it's time within the scope of the grant to make some changes. So then maybe we can make some improvements and then our summative evaluation will be in a better shape. Okay? And then understanding the actual metrics by which you'll know whether you are successful or not. It also needs to speak to what your operations will look like. So what is the actual work going to be done and what is your plan for that? Excuse me. And then what is your budget? And your budget, ideally, should include two parts. So it should include, obviously, your spreadsheet and your breakdown of the actual costs you're going to incur. But it also should include what's called a budget narrative for us liberal arts majors in the crowd. So an actual narrative that speaks to why you need these particular kinds of funds and why you're spending things on what, right? You also are going to need to speak to what are called your direct costs and indirect costs, right? So if you're looking for, say, all right, let's say a grant is going to take up a third of your executive manager's time, right? Just on a day-to-day basis. It's like, well, if it takes up a third of their time, we'll need to include some funding in there to actually pay my executive manager, right? That's what's called an indirect cost. If you're doing a reading promotion program, and I know I'm on that because I'm a librarian, the purchase of books for that program would be what's called a direct cost. So you need to speak to both of those things. And you need to understand how you are going to operate as an organization and also how you're going to execute the grant that you're trying to get and be able to speak to that in the grant itself. Does that make sense? All right, I see some nods. So, all right. Yes.
Question about that. So, for example, if we are seeking for funding for specific program that will be led, some activities will be led by facilitators. So the facilitator fee, is that then a direct cost or an indirect?
I believe that would be a direct cost. Yes. So it would be, that would be the actual, so they're not employees of your organization. Yeah. So you would be hiring them specifically to do that. Yeah. I would believe that would be a direct cost. And that would be something too, you can ask your grant. I know that next week we're going to have, and hopefully if I can get the planning right, we'll have grant writers in this room to help you out with all that stuff too. So it's not just Steve you're dependent on. So anyway, but does that answer your question? All right, cool. All right. So, and I know that I just sped through that like crazy, but we do want to, obviously nobody wants to hear Steve talk all day. So now we are successful. We've gotten through the questions we've asked ourselves, questions we've asked our grantor, and now, oh man, we've written the grant. Wild success, right? So now what do we do? Well, we need to first follow up, regardless of whether we got the grant or not, right? Because again, when you are in the nonprofit world, studies have shown the biggest problem that they have is not the grant itself, it's the alignment of the organization with the grant. So if you follow up, even in a rejection situation, there might be more grant opportunities in the future. They might be connected with other organizations that would be a better fit. They might just say, well, just, keep us on the line and we're going to meet next week. Maybe we'll figure this out. You know what I mean? So there's lots of other possibilities that can come with even a rejection of your grant. So what your task is, regardless of whether you got the grant or not, is to seek information, right? And then build your relationships into the future. Make sure that, again, regardless of whether you are successful or not in getting the grant, keep contact with funders. It's a big mistake that a lot of grantors will make is that, they get the grant and they go do the thing and the grantor won't hear from the grantee until they're done. That's not great, right? You want to be able to keep them abreast of all the things that are happening, to allay their concerns, and if anything, just keep building that relationship for future grants, right? So you want to keep those lines of communication open. And then, obviously, seek future opportunities whenever you're able. And that's it. So again, the thing that you want to take away from this presentation is that I am your business librarian, and I'm here to help you, right? We have some really powerful tools in the library that can help you, but the grant seeking process really consists of 4 parts. You're asking questions of yourself, you're asking questions of a funder, only then are you writing the grant, and then you're following up. And no matter where you're at in the grant seeking process, chances are we at the Grand Rapids Public Library have something and someone that can help you out. And that's what I think about that.